Hey, what's going on, folks? Johnny the Historian here. This is going to be a series, or start of a series of a previous series after the last two episodes, but basically it's going to be a series on the origins of the First World War. The war to end all wars. The Great War. In a sense, the unnecessary war. But we're going to look at the roots before we get to the trunk. Now, one thing I love, one of my favorite wars is the First World War. Or World War One. And I remember in university, I took a whole year's seminar on this. And, dude, there's a lot to the First World War, just as much as the Second, despite the first is the cause of the Second. But, well, a great portion of that. And I'm going to tell you one thing, man. But we're going to learn about the origins of the First World War. So we're going to go through a lot. There's going to be a lot of content and a lot of episodes. So if you're into the First World War, and especially want to know the origins, before we get into the blood, guts, and gore of the battlefield, we got a lot to cover. A lot to cover, okay? There has been books written on the origins, and it doesn't even cover a portion. So we're going to cover as much as we can through it. Now, the first major catalyst of the First World War is one ideology that I love to study, that you're kind of seeing across the world right now in its emergence. Nationalism. Nationalism. Wow. Nationalism's major roots, it was finally molded and crafted to perfection and solidified during the French Revolution, and particularly by Napoleon Bonaparte. So it changed everything. This is an ideology that shaped the world that we live in today. Like everything, it's got positive and negative effects. Alright, nationalism had here's the reaction. What's the reaction? And what's the side effects? Alright? Positive and negative. It's just a lot. It really shaped our globe and explains a lot of things that are happening in the world today. We've seen a surge in nationalism in Canada, especially when we got threatened to be the 51st state of the United States. Not so good, right? We had a surge of nationalism. But what is nationalism? Okay, is it different from patriotism? All right, major difference between the two. All right, very, very major. I would say in Canada it's more patriotism. And in America right now, it's more towards the senses of nationalism. Alright? Well, what is nationalism? Now, it's an ideology that emphasizes the loyalty, devotion, as much as allegiance, would be the three major factors of that, to a nation. It holds in such obligation, and it outweighs the individual or even the group's rights. Alright? Now, all the characteristics of culture, religion, language, geographical location, history, cultures, customs, and traditions are all shared by that one sole nation, that one massive group of people. Alright? We kind of see a lot of things of it today. Now, patriotism, here's the difference between patriotism. Patriotism is pretty much the love and respect of one's own country and its people, obviously, within that country. Now, it focuses more on the values, the identity it's proud of, right? Now, with nationalism, you have more of a belief of superiority, all right? Everyone else is inferior to you, all right? Now, that can lead to a lot of hostility, discrimination, and prejudice towards other nations. Seems like America's entirely stance since the last 240 years. So it's the last 240 years. But the overall characteristics of nationalism is mostly a shared identity, right? Unify. Now, in most of my series, everything is actually in relation. Well, somewhat. All right? But what is the basis of nationalism? Nationalism is solidified, and it classifies a lot of political sovereignty, solidarity, especially national solidarity, and the concept of superiority of better than other nations. Militarily, economically, culturally. You know, you see America do this all the time. They bully a lot, right? And this is one of the negative effects of nationalism. But one thing with nationalism, it has a lot of pride within one's nation, okay? Within one's self and citizens. Very prideful. Well, what comes before destruction? Pride. Pride leads to self-destruction. This is true. A lot of nations and empires have done this. And in the modern time, a lot of examples, right? So it kind of deteriorates a lot of things that are going on, all right? And that's the beauty about nationalism. But remember, nationalism is like that weak little boy. Then all of a sudden you give him those steroids of nationalism, and that patriotism is nothing at this point. It's nationalism. Pretty much patriotism is nationalism is patriotism on steroids. Let's put it that way. Okay. Totally out there. And I love history this much. It's awesome to compare it to them. Now, one thing about nationalism, the term of environmentalism, which is the ability to adapt to its environment to inspire a movement, is what we're looking at when it comes to environmentalism. One thing nationalism does, it has the ability to adapt to its environment. You're a product of your environment? Well, nationalism is one of those features that can camouflage and blend and molt into its surroundings and its society and people that is kind of doing. It does it very well. All right, in the last 250 years, roughly, ballpark, and definitely over 200 years, it has almost 225 years. Anyway, it has the ability to do that. Now, one thing about where nationalism has a lot of past history, all right, a lot of building blocks, not nationalism as entirely, as Napoleon put it, okay? We'll get to that point. Napoleon, the French Revolution, and how he used nationalism to do this and to build a Napoleonic empire stretched across Europe until all the way to Moscow. So, remember, it's also a colonial empire, also ruled the world. So, the thing is, there's a lot of building blocks. But just like building blocks and even the building blocks of life, it had to take the right environments, the right circumstances to actually come together. That was the French Revolution. But just before it, you had another revolution. 1775 to 1783. Right across the pond. The American Revolution. Now, the American Revolution is differently enough. But this actually has a lot of contents of nationalism. Alright? Remember the 13 colonies wanted to drive out British authority. Alright? They wanted to have self-determination, freedom for British rule. They wanted to become their own independent nation. The 13 colonies. Now, they do this very well. And they chose for self-governance as a nation. So when they actually did this, but they also have loyalty. And one thing about the American Revolution is basically they just felt American. They didn't feel British. They never classified themselves as British. They classified them as American. We're American. We don't want to be ruled by British no more. We are not British subjects. We're American subjects. This shared identity. This shared passion. And they had different values and political and economic views, as much as social views, than the British Empire. They wanted to establish their own self-interest and rule. Now, on a side note, let's go to Canada for a second during this time. Now, one thing about Canadian nationalism, it really developed in the 1690s. And this is very important, and I have to redeal this. This is the truth, as much as I like to admit it. You gotta thank the French for this. Because the French started to put themselves towards the concept of nationalism. To define themselves as Canadian. A lot of memoirs, a lot of diaries, a lot of documents at the time within the French communities within the lands of Canada, the Dominion of Canada, or Prince Rupert's Land, all throughout the country of the British Empire at the time, documented this. As it's in their writings. Now, it didn't really become total effect until the War of 1812. Right? So, the War of 1812, it's like the phrase, too, in the American Revolution by Patrick Henry, pretty much, give me liberty or give me death. Well, I like to give you liberty because I really don't want to kill the guy, right? You kind of feel like, yeah, I should just give you liberty. I want to kill you all, right? It was a very nationalistic phrase, and without the 13 colonies. And then within Canada, it was something like this. This came later on, especially in the War of 1812. So, excuse me. Now, as you remember, in the War of 1812, what happened April the 24th, 1813? Okay? The Americans burned York, present-day Toronto. This was the capital of the Canadian region, capital of Canada. At the time, Ottawa, Alright? This was a huge, huge deterrent. But at the same time, because of such a tragedy, which is usually notorious throughout history and the world we live in today, and we see this a lot, it takes a death for any change to happen. Well, the death of York and the destruction of York, people of Canada started to identify themselves as Canadians. And it became a homeland. Not just, we were born here and that's it, and we're subjects of the British Empire. It became more ingrained. Canada, we're Canadian-British, not British-Canadian. There's a few examples of this. And the thing is, people started to have an identity of the land. Because they had to protect it. For the first time, majorly, they had to go to war with another nation to protect it. It developed that shared identity. Then they started to realize the culture, we all share the same language here, we're English, we're French. We have a nation, and this other sovereign nation that just gained their independence decided to invade us. But we do need the British, we're still part of the British colony and Commonwealth, but we needed to get that out there, which was amazing, okay? Now, so they burned York. Now, this is a myth that we like to sponsor in our Canadian nationalism or patriotism, that us as Canadians burnt the White House. Us as Canadians didn't go down. It was the British. It was the British Marines, all right, that actually went down on August the 24th, 1814. Notorious date. We burned the White House. We burned Washington. Okay, D.C. So, but there was Canadians in the army. But it wasn't solely majority of Canadians that decided to set fire to the White House, alright? But it's notoriously associated with Canada that we always like to say, yeah, we went down there and burned your White House. In a sense, we kind of did, but this is kind of a Canadian myth around it, alright? I mean, there's Canadians within the ranks, but there was more British than Canadians actually down in Washington burning the White House. So we do have a part in it. But not as the part as we like to explain. And I know that the truth sucks, but that's the point of history. But we were in the ranks, but there was more British doing it. So we kind of have a part in it, but not 100% credit like we like to believe today. But still, it is a part of our history. And us as Canadians were part of those ranks that went down there with the British Marines and soldiers and helped them destroy and burn Washington and the White House to the ground. So, and to define ourselves as a nation because these people came back, right? This is a little side note. Now, the thing is, you have to say, did war shape the Canadian identity? Sort to say, yes. This is things of war. People don't like to talk about war, especially libtards, woke, and millennials. War's bad. evil, disgusting to talk about. Why would you mention it? Well, here's the reality, folks. I talked about war one time. They're like, you're so negative. Alright, I'm a historian. We look at both sides of the spectrum. If you think it's negative, it's not my fault that you do. Yours. Just remember that. Someone asks you about when he says that, say, yeah, that's your problem, not your own. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now, but a little side note for Canada, we'll finish Canada because this is good too, because we didn't really start to develop our identity as a nation to the First and Second World Wars. Mostly it took place during the wars. So, think about World War One. We had Passchendaele, Vimy Ridge, these notorious battles that were in the First World War, which we will get to when we get there. But this is, I'm going to mention them now, because I don't want to leave that unfolded. Alright? Now, this forged, and profoundly forged, our national identity and unity as a nation. Okay? It boosted our international status and prestige as a nation, as a people, as those Canadians, not those British subjects or colonists, right? It did not do this at all, okay? It also fostered a lot of social change. Women were mostly, started to become more and more in the workplace in Canada. Actually, that transfers to nationalism, and we were starting to get more of an identity of Canadian, right? All right, like Vimy Ridge was one of the most distinct of being a Canadian, separate from Britain, because we just stormed in there, and it was the Canadians. It wasn't the British, it was the Canadians, right? But that's the great thing about it, right? All right, so yeah, it's a beautiful piece of Canadian history. We'll be getting more online when we do more down the seminar. There's a lot more, and mostly it's hard to find on the internet. You find some on the internet, some in books, and a lot in the archives. This book is very important. Reference this one a lot. Even comes to nationalism. Alright? Even when it comes to nationalism. Now, there's a lot of building blocks, though, when it comes to nationalism throughout the course of human history. From ancient times, medieval times, and obviously we know it's fermented. And keep that in mind, like the Ten Commandments, it's rammed in stone by Napoleon. And it's here to stay like COVID, okay? It's here to stay like AIDS, alright? It's going to be here for a very long time to find something to replace it. But throughout the course of human history, there has been these episodes where you had some of these molecules, but not all, to make a new life form, okay? Hints of nationalism, but it wasn't in the right environments or circumstances. That's key where history and geography come together. Well, it also goes in a lot of concepts of that, okay? Environment is a part of geography. Social, political, economic environments, right? So, first forms of nationalism I have to come to agree with nationalism is Herodotus. Now, he didn't directly write. He did not directly write about modern nationalism. But he does hint it. Now, he does hint it. And he hints it very well. So, where does he hint it? He hints it right in the first of the book. And remember last time, well, we'll read it again, because, you know. For the marvelous will put off here forgotten time, not to be forgotten in time, and great and marvelous deeds. Some displayed by the Greeks, some by the barbarians, may not be without their glory, and especially to show why these two people fought each other, remember, in the Greco-Persian War. This is what he documents in this. So, that right off the get-go, how do you get that? Now, the Greeks just developed their own identity. Collective identity. If you weren't Greek, despite Greece was divided up into many city-states, this is the collective identity, the shared identity. Now, they all share the same language, they all worship the same gods and went to the same temples. They have the same traditions and in some senses and customs, but not really. Think about Athens and Sparta. Woo-hoo, totally different. You got gay boys and you got the men. All right. So here's so this is what happens, right? But they're all Greek. See, not the right environment to seal it. All right. The seed was planted, but it didn't sprout too far. Concept, okay? The environment couldn't grasp it enough to hold root in Greece to have that nationalistic modern feel, what we know of nationalism today. So, but he does share the collective Greek identity, language, history, religion. And you remember, if you watched the first two, you know about Herodotus. All right? Now, he does put this, because this eventually comes down the road again. Now, all the city-states, and they had a common enemy. That helped solidify their identity. The Persian Empire. Right? It helps seal it. Not too much, but it really helps seal it. Because every nation, you know, especially for the city-states, they thought they were all better than the other city-states. But when it came to a common enemy, they had a collective identity. As Greeks, we all speak the same language, right? The Athenians can speak to the Spartans. They all speak Greek. Greek is one of those building blocks. But it didn't get quite up there in the right environment, and it all toppled. Keep that in mind. Environment plays a very important role. It's kind of like, oh, just teasing you. It's like a cock tease right on the weekend. You know, she just gets you, and it's like, no, I'm going with the other man, boys. And you're sitting there, harder than rocks, and going home to self-loathing. Or, in this case, self-identification. Alright? Among the other people that got rejected that night. You come a group. Alright? I was there. Oh, yeah. All the time. Growing up. But this is the thing, and he actually does show a lot of it in this. Alright? He also shows the concept of united Greece. Fighting against the Persians. This was crucial against a common enemy. Right? I'm sorry, but the world's always going to be split into two. Minimum. Maximum, and many times in ancient history, is split into 5, 6, a dozen times. But either or, it's always going to be two. We live in the modern day of two. Right? There's always going to be two sides because naturally it's built into your biology that you need an enemy to unite you. How many people in your life actually you know that you came together because you hated something? Now you got to be honest with yourself. Me? 100%. I met a lot of my friends through the concept of hatred. It's not the greatest sin to go through, like, you know what I mean? But that's how it happened. You were united against a common front. Same as the Greeks against the Persians. Not much different. Okay, and if you weren't Greek and everybody else, and this is the superiority thing, right? This leads to Hellenism, alright? Hellenism. Pan-Hellenism in the future. This is the foundations of it. It did exist then. Alright? Now, Greece eventually couldn't make this fostered. Right? For hundreds of years, well over thousands of years, 500 years, 2,000 years. They were pretty much conquered by everyone else. But anyway, this is why that environment couldn't foster it. So much oppression. Right? Keep this in mind. Now, here's the brilliant thing about this. This is what I love about it. And Herodotus puts it. Barbarians. So here's that inferiority. They're united against barbarians, the Persians. Everyone else that was not in the Greek lands or in the Greek city-states, and you didn't speak Greek, you didn't do anything Greek, and I'm not talking from behind, that too, you were a barbarian. They classified themselves right off the get-go as inferior. Right in the first paragraph of the first book of the histories written by Herodotus, it states it right there. Displayed by Greeks and some by barbarians. Two classes. Now you're calling yourself a Greek when you're a Greek and everyone else a barbarian. Well, that means you seem like everyone else is inferior to you. Right? It says it right there in the writing. You don't have to read the whole chapter. It says it right there. You want to read the whole chapter and the whole book, one, to really verify that in the whole 9 books, but it's up to you. But there's a lot of key elements in Herodotus' work, and that's the thing. And shared blood and shared common language and shared customs, creating that sense, that nationalistic sense, right? A lot of those building blocks are there. But the idea that the Greeks, if you're an Athenian, you were proud of your city-state. You were proud of Athens. You were proud of Sparta. You were proud of Corinth. You were proud of Thebes. You were proud of all of these. Mention. You were proud of all these city-states. If you were proud of it, that was like your home turf. It's like you're growing up in high school. Go Cobras, right? So, what? We're going against who? It's like Mary, go Timberwolves, right? Go Oilers. Go Oilers, right? You have that almost like hockey teams. Oilers. Flames. But Flames. Right? But you're all in the same province. But you have that hockey loyalty. You can't define until there's only one left remaining in the playoffs. Then you kind of switch all to that. Then it becomes for the entire province. Bring it home to Alberta. It didn't become all of a sudden bring it home to Calgary. Right? The same thing happens in Greece at this time. So, one thing too with the enemy, it was pretty much a war, you could actually say, between freedom and despotism. Okay? You know, the free man against the despot. So, that unified the Greeks. And this is a form of nationalism too, because America really experienced this during the Cold War as much as a lot of NATO nations. As much as during the Soviet Union. Alright? This all came a unifying force. Awesome. Just awesome. Alright? Just awesome. And Herodotus puts a lot of it in there, right? And this was the thing. And we could go really more deep into it. Probably will later on. We'll be coming back to it. Okay? When we come back to Herodotus and another few Greek historians at the time. If you see my other episodes, we'll be going back to them too. This book is going to be referenced a lot in a lot of things I do. It's almost the Bible of history. He didn't come out and say strictly modern nationalism, but he put a lot of building blocks, mentioned a lot of building blocks in it. But as I said before, it wasn't the right environment to foster completely. It cock teased you. Let's put it in street terms, okay? Now, ancient nationalism. And the Greeks really did this well. Even the Assyrians, you can go back to the Babylonians in a lot of sense, they had some ideas of nationalism. I didn't really want to bring those in this one. Okay? But it is also mentioned by Herodotus. Okay? But the next big thing, because of Greek and why it couldn't foster, is because guess who come knocking at their door not that long much later? The Macedonians. Right? The idea of Alexander was very nationalistic in a lot of senses. He wanted to create a whole world, the same everything, share the same. But it became hybrid, right? But then again, who's the next big one to come along? Knocking at Greece's door and the city-states. Greece was kind of unified, but not as much as you think. Time that happened, Rome came in and squished that idea real quick. Real quick. Alright? Now, the Romans and the Greeks definitely have the idea of a shared identity of culture, religion, and language. And especially lineage and even customs. Alright? But that's a lot of the term of nationalism, isn't it? It's almost like nationalism, but it wasn't really quite what we know that Napoleon actually solidified and created that complete structure of it. Completed solid. But the Romans do a little thing too, okay? Now, one thing with the Romans, the first thing I want to discuss with the Romans and their sense of nationalism and that ancient nationalism or those building blocks is basically the social wars. And you don't learn this in school. This is something, there's a really good book on it. And the social wars was 91 to 88 BC, or 89 BC. 91 to 89 BC. Some suggest 88 to BC, okay? Now, this was called the social wars, all right? Now, the one thing about the social wars is the fact that the entire Italian peninsula that they actually conquered by this time started to rebel. You had the Samnites, the Etruscans. You had even the Greeks to the south, the colonies, okay, and Sicily, and at pretty much the tail end of the boot of Italy, okay? You had all these people throughout Italy, but then you had one section that was Roman. It was like Greece, bunch of city-states, but not really city-states, okay? All under one ruler. Now, the social war started this because all these guys started to rebel. Now, they're rebelling for their independence, right? Free to make their own self-determination, their own self-governance, free from others to become their own identity that they associate with. Well, the Romans did this too, but the Romans said, we already conquered you guys, so how are we going to solve this problem? And they pass a law. And this is one of the things in the 10 reasons of history. Remember citizenship? Rome issued citizenship. We're all not different. We're all Roman. Right across the Italian peninsula, which this is the very foundation of modern Italy, you're all Roman. Now, after a couple generations, everybody considers themselves in the Italian peninsula Roman. Even the Greek colonies to the south start to fade away. The Greeks become Roman. Their culture still exists and lives on in those parts, but they classify themselves as Romans. Right? Jewish immigrants would come into the country and classify themselves as Canadian. Right? And this is what the Romans do with that. They grant citizenship to everyone on the peninsula. This becomes the new Rome, the heart of the empire. Instead of this little round surrounding city around this and around the Tigris River Valley and right out to Seta or Osa, and all these places around, well, guess what? All of it now is Rome. When you meet someone, I'm a Roman citizen. Are you? I was a Samnite or Etruscan, but now I'm a Roman citizen. And that was the first identity they all shared. And this actually kept peace from there on the peninsula. Okay? Until later on down the road. To the Middle Ages. Alright? In a lot of senses, okay? This is, right? Now the big thing starts to happen a few hundred years down the road during the time of the Empire is the next big one. Now, in 212, you have the Carta, the Edict of Carta. And this basically, under that time, it takes place during the Roman twin emperors, which is based upon Gladiator 2. Sort of share that, alright? It takes place in that time. And the emperor that comes out of that, I don't really want to get into it really much so. I'm trying to wrap this one up. So, well, that grants citizenship to everyone in the empire. It's slowly classified as a Roman citizen. Alright? If you're free. If you're a free man. And loyalty to the emperor. A little bit more unified for the entire empire. And it's actually kind of too late by this point to actually put the sole identity of the empire being Roman. But it stays. Alright? It becomes a little foundational thing for feudalism later on. Now, you're going to think that's a little hilarious, but when we get there, I'll let you know why. And how it happened. Alright? So, a lot of things started to happen. Alright? Now, well, we're not going to talk about the feudalism, okay? We're going to wrap right up a little bit more quick to the medieval era. Alright? You had a shift from king to lord, which is feudalism, to family, to a geographical location and define yourself by a definite territory. People started to develop this during the Middle Ages. All right? And everybody was under the church in Europe. All right? Little bit of religious identity. Yeah, we might hate each other until the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther King nailed that shit upon the door. Right? But even then, you had the Great Schism in 1054 between the Catholics and the Orthodox world. But still, very foundation, all Christian Europe, the Christendom. Alright? The first unified, we are known as Christendom, despite your Orthodox or Catholic. And eventually it became even the Protestants' Christendom for a time. Right? But not really much happens in the Middle Ages. We're going to kind of skip that because I'm really interested in the ancient history, where it really started. But even feudalism has that history because you start to have that identity and that purpose that all of us to one sole thing. Not just a nation, but even on a territorial space with your feudal lord, that this land is my farmland, is my home, he's my lord. Just like a miniature version of the Roman Empire after 212 AD. Okay? I might see the similarities. But that's where we're going to wrap this episode up, because next episode that we get into, it's going to be a shift of loyalty and a more collective, because we're going to get up to the French Revolution that happens in 1789 to 1799 in Napoleon. That's going to be an episode itself where the origins and where nationalism finally gets all those building blocks actually line up into perfection. And Napoleon actually does it. So that would be the next episode on that. Deeper into nationalism, okay? I'm trying to keep them short, between 30 minutes and 45. I could go an hour. No problem. One time I lectured for 2 hours straight. 3 hours is the max. No trouble on the topics. So, and we're just shortening it, all right? Just a little heads up, just to solidify everything that from the Greeks, from what nationalism is, difference between patriotism, remember all these key aspects, and all those building blocks throughout the course of human history in the Western world towards nationalism. And remember, product of its environment. It came really close in ancient Greece in a lot of senses, closer than any other time before the French Revolution or the American Revolution okay, when it finally ended in 1783. So all of that, it finally solidified. Had all the building blocks and all the pieces were in place to get roots and to grow. And it grew fast on steroids. But anyways, well, that's that video. But next time we're actually going to talk about is pretty much the shift of loyalty. And when it comes to the French Revolution and during France, how nationalism actually started to become. And today, you've got to remember, this is just a quick commentary at the end of each one about compared to modern world. The Americans really developed nationalism. You know, when they went into Venezuela, they damn well knew that they were better than them militarily, even economically. They could go in and just take. One thing about a nationalistic country was just like Napoleon, so confident and so prideful that in confidence that it could think it could do anything and get away with it. And actually, in a sense, Napoleon did that, believe it or not. And he's one of the most historical figures that shaped the course of human history. That the world would be different if you took him out of the equation. I think if you even took him out of the equation and the French Revolution, the world we live in today wouldn't exist. We'd still be living, I think, in the Middle Ages. That's the upside of nationalism. But we're going to learn a lot about the downsides of nationalism, like, I don't know, Nazi Germany, all right? They really take national, inject it with steroids, but they also do coke and meth and perks and every other freaking drug out there with it. They just go apeshit. Alright? So, with it. So, but when it comes to the Middle Ages, one thing we're going to discuss next is we're going to start off with the shift in loyalty, which is huge in nationalism because you got to remember the definition of nationalism. A shared identity. if you have a massive amount of people that share the same loyalty to one cause, one everything, one language, it's technically the same thing, even a person. That kind of is a unifying force. And one thing about nationalism, it's been around a long time in shape, ways, or forms. And I would love to get into ancient nationalism, but in my other in my theology and historical sermon, or a series which I'm going to be starting up hopefully in the next month or so, there's a lot that ties from this series into that series, and even on my rants and raves. As a historian, if you went through to all of them, you could put the piece together. I purposely made it that way. And if you made it this far, now you know. If not, those people are not going to know. But you do. But anyway, so this whole series, we're going to look at nationalism and a lot of it. All right, we're going to look at a lot about nationalism over the next quite a few episodes. And then we're going to get into, don't know, but more of the roots of the First World War, the origins of the First World War. All right, and how a lot of these things started from our ancestors that actually survive in today. But ask yourself, are we patriotic in this country of Canada, or do we have a nationalistic vibe? We're mostly patriotic. All right, we don't say our country is better. The only thing that we say that our country is better at is hockey. But even lately, our pride and our confidence was so high for so many decades that right now, even on the World Juniors, it's sinking. That confidence is weighing because of that overconfidence, that prideful that we are number one and hockey is our sport. And the fact of the truth is, we're losing that nationalistic pride in it in a lot of aspects because it's like, man, it's been 3 years or more. If you look at the last 10 years compared to the 10 years before, when it comes to the World Juniors, alone, the Olympics, which is coming up, we failed. Like this Winter Olympics, I could probably guarantee you that we're not going to win as a nation. We're not going to win gold. I strongly don't believe that we have it in us to win gold compared to the players of the rest of the world in the Olympics in 2026, Winter Olympics. So that's my prediction. I hate to say it, I don't want to, but I'm a huge hockey fan, and I love hockey. It is our sport. I have that pride in it, but I think it's our age that we got too prideful, too confident, too ignorant. Now we're going to go on the downhill and to smarten ourselves up when we get to the bottom level again. Yeah, just like life. Now, but that's about the end of that. So the next time we do, we're going to start to get into the French Revolution and Napoleon. And we're going to look at how the stuff come out of the French Revolution. We're also going to tie it to the American Revolution. We're also going to tie it to ancient fragments of nationalism. Okay, I like to say. All right, how it's all supplying and how it all became that right environment to start that movement, the right atmosphere, and the right landscape. Okay, that will be coming up pretty shortly. So when I get the time to do a video, and I just do it, here you go, all up here for the most part. Well, for the most part, I would say. For the most part. But, hey, it's what I do. It's what you should do as a historian. So keep that in mind. Nationalism is a very thing, and we're going to look at a lot of it. The ups, the downs, the positives, the negatives, and we're going to go through all that shit. So, keep your stick on the ice. Remember, slap a libtard when you see one, because they need a history lesson. So be a man, know your history, give them a lesson, then slap them upside the head, and hopefully it sticks. Until next time, yeah, you know what to do.